I've been seeing this girl for a few months now, and over the last few weeks she told me that when we fight, she has intrusive thoughts about killing me. She told me that I don't have anything to worry about in reality because she's never acted on it. When she's doing well, she literally couldn't bring herself to harm a fly, and she is the sweetest soul when she gets mad. She has very little control over her emotions and body. She's gotten abusive in the past, pushing, shoving, hitting, and name-calling. I've told her that it's not acceptable while remaining as calm as possible. And so far it seems like she's somewhat respectful of that. She won't hit me as hard, and I can see that she's really trying to control herself. I'm not saying I'm really worried about the intrusive thoughts of murdering me because I understand the difference between a thought and acting on it. But I have to say it's new to me, and I've never had to deal with it before. I don't know if I'm being ignorant or gullible in believing that nothing would happen. Though I don't know, it's a tough situation. I'm hoping to get some guidance because I really do love her very much. I'm just trying my best to be there for her without. To around the holidays last year, the guy had been dating came over and almost murdered me. It started when he saw an Instagram archive story that I posted, and he took issue with it, and we argued, and that argument turned violent towards me. I yelled at him to leave, but he wouldn't, and instead pushed me around the house and strangled me on 3, maybe 4 separate occasions. The final time he strangled me, I went unconscious for maybe 20 to 30 seconds. I'm not 100% sure in the time that it was out, but I was definitely unconscious. 1 second I was standing up, and the next second I was on the ground. I also don't remember him taking a picture of me while I was out. But he did, and he later sent it to me as a way of taunting me. Of course I got the cops involved, but I felt terrible about it. I only did it because my mom and dad basically forced me to snitch. And at the time I still loved my boyfriend. So I felt awful about getting him into trouble. I wondered if he hated me, or if he was upset with me. But when I heard he got arrested and let out the same day, I became afraid I was going to have to see him in court for the peace order, and I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him and his family, who I once thought would end up being my in-laws. Eventually I have some nightmares and trouble sleeping these days, but I still don't really feel anything. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I just know I don't want to go to court because I feel like that'll make everything worse. Bed, my boyfriend of 3 years, is normally a lovely, caring person who treats me very well. But after a few drinks, his temper really scares me. The last time it happened, him and my girlfriend and I were out drinking for her birthday. Her husband left early and she was left with no money, so we covered her drinks and I agreed to drive her home at 8 a.m. The next day on the way home, my boyfriend flipped out about how much we spent and how he was not driving her home, etc. She heard it all, and I apologized the next day. That wasn't the only time. Either other times he's gotten mad and broken doors, punched walls, smashed things, and thrown things in the past. I've excused his behavior more than I should, as I felt responsible for setting him off, either with a comment or something I did. I know now that his actions are not okay. Last night, he and that same girlfriend and myself and his brother went out dancing. Due to the fact that he didn't want to spend money on drinks, my girlfriend went to the bar presumably to buy drinks and ended up getting Dr. drinks bought for us after a man told us that we were beautiful and offered to get us some drinks. Now I get that this was probably not the right call, but after last time and my boyfriend flipping out about not spending money, I figured why the hell not. But then when he sees us talking to the guy, he went crazy, had us all go back to the car and drove home at like 95 miles per hour, despite everyone screaming to slow down. All the while he was yelling at me. When we got home, he screamed at my friend for stabbing him in the back by trying to hook his girlfriend up with some random guy, and then took a taxi somewhere. Today I only heard from him once, but he's basically blaming it entirely on me. He says that I caused it by being disrespectful to him, and I deserved every bit of it. I feel partially at fault, although I don't care if he flirts with other women. I think flirting is healthy, if it remains innocent, because I should have realized that he would have been upset, and I don't really know what to do. Right now I'm in a position where I can't afford the place that we live in alone, and I feel trapped. I don't have the option of living with my friends as they're all married with kids, and I really don't have any other family to go. Paul, 4 hours ago, I got home from a night out with 2 of my friends at our usual bar. We arrived around 9 p.m., nothing too late, And then after a couple of drinks, I walked back home, as was me and my girlfriend live close by. The lights were still on, and so was the TV. So I switched everything off, had a fast shower, then got into bed next to my girlfriend, who I thought was asleep. I usually watch my phone before bed, so I left my bedside lamp on next to me. Then as I climbed into bed, my girlfriend suddenly turned around. I thought maybe I'd given her sort of a little bit of a scare climbing in next to her, but she suddenly reached under her pillow and pulled out one of her knives from the kitchen and then started trying to stab me. I fell out of bed, phone still in my hand, then ran out the door. I didn't bother putting shoes on and ran outside. I had no keys, so I couldn't lock the door, but my girlfriend didn't follow me. I stood in the middle of the street, made sure that there was plenty of space around me, and dialed 911. It's the same numbers as here in Buenos Aires. It felt like my chest was just soaked in warm water. There was a trickle going down my front and a few splatters of blood on the drive too by now. And I was pretty shocked and didn't really feel much pain until a lot later. 2 cars and an ambulance came by, and I was put in the ambulance with an officer. The pain from my gash had now begun to get more painful, and they gave me some pain relief, as well as having one of the medics apply pressure on my wound. I puked as well, probably because of the shock and the blood, and I don't do well with blood at all. Meanwhile, another 3 or 4 officers ran into our apartment. I found out much later that my girlfriend was just sitting on the bed. She hadn't said anything and was just crying, saying how sorry she was, but they took her away pretty easily. I'm now sitting in the emergency department, just got stitches for my shoulder. It feels numb, but not too painful. I got my phone back about 3 hours ago, and since I have nothing else to do, I thought I would just write up my own true story to you as a way to cope. I haven't really slept at all, and it's almost noon when I'm writing this, but I station or interviewed here, and I'm just completely exhausted right now. And it's hard to believe the entire situation is real sometimes, like I fall asleep and wake up again. But my bad dream is my reality. I still don't know for sure if she was actually trying to kill me. It is incredibly difficult for me to even come to terms with it, but I can't imagine she only wanted to hurt me. I feel lucky that she didn't actually stab me and only slash me, as from how close we were. She could have easily stabbed my heart or lungs. My biggest worry in all of this is the publicity this sort of thing might generate. I live in a pretty small city, and news like this is very rare. And for the sake of her, I absolutely do not want to make it public. And I'm also worried about the mental repercussions that this will have on me and her writing. This is the only moment I've had to fully process this event, and I'm writing this both for my own sake and mental health, as well as to share it with all of you, my friends, and I'm completely lost with what to do. It's not been long since it happened, but I've got absolutely no idea how I'm going to proceed on with my life, and I'm so worried about my girlfriend. They haven't told me anything about her since I got here, and hopefully once I'm interviewed by the police, they'll help clear things up for me. I feel incredibly lucky to be alive. Now, things could have gone a lot differently. I don't think I've really fully processed the fact that if she sliced me any deeper, I could be lying in a pool of blood in my very own. Murder in August of the year 2020. A 45-year-old Michigan City man named David Morris contacted law enforcement to report his wife's disappearance. 29-year-old Candy Brown Morris was the mother of his 3 children. And so naturally, David seemed understandably desperate to bring her home safe and sound. Just days later, one of Candy's friends contacted the police to inform them that in the wee small hours of August 25th, she'd given him a ride back to his apartment. Tyrone Harris claimed that Candy hadn't been acting out of the ordinary, leading police to suspect that her so-called disappearance was merely an effort to avoid her husband, potentially as the result of marital discord a few days later. Candy's wallet was recovered from a Michigan City bar called Riley's. A short time afterward, her car was discovered parked at a different establishment, the nearby Three Sheets bar. Obviously, this indicated that she was still in the state of Indiana, with analyses of her cell phone records showing she last sent a text near the corner of County Line in Chandler Roads and Pines, Indiana, just 4 miles down the road from Michigan City law enforcement, stated that the text message's contents were, quote, nothing out of the ordinary, and that they were considering an end of the investigation. David, on the other hand, insisted that something must have been terribly wrong for his wife to simply disappear and enlisted the help of found 24 volunteers in patrolling the area surrounding the town of Pines. It was during one of these searches that David met a 30-year-old volunteer named Anna Reeves David, and Anna spent a great deal of time together, going from door to door around Pines while seeking information on the missing Candy. Then, around a month after the volunteer search had concluded, it became increasingly obvious that David and Anna were dating several months later. During May of 23, David and Anna were still an item when a shocking piece of news hit the airwaves. Candy Morris, who by that point hadn't been seen since late August of 2012, was found dead in a wooded area, less than a 4-mile from the place she'd sent that final text message. Seeing as her corpse was in an advanced state of decomposition, it was impossible to determine the exact cause of her death. Yet Candy's wasn't the only dead body found that day. That same morning, Anna Reeves, David Morris's girlfriend of several months, was discovered to have passed away in her sleep. An Indiana coroner declared that the cause of death was accidental, due to acute drug intoxication or overdose. Yet many in law enforcement were concerned by the reports that in the weeks prior to her death, Anna had attempted to file domestic violence charges against David. Despite the highly suspicious circumstances, David was never charged in connection with either his wife's or his girlfriend's sudden deaths. But just a few years later, he showed his hand in the most vile and violent of circumstances in 2016. Ario Ortega was a Mexican migrant who had relocated to the United States just 3 years prior. The 65-year-old co-owned Michigan City's Easy Drive auto with a man named Sergio Chirano, and spent almost every waking moment applying his trade at the shop in the hopes of providing a better life for his family, who remained south of the border in early 2016. Sergio sold half of the auto shop business to Hasio. Yet despite no longer working together, the two men remained very close. So in April of that same year, when Hasio suddenly stopped returning his old friend's texts and calls, Sergio became increasingly concerned for his well-being. On April 23rd of 2016, Sergio decided to pay his old establishment an impromptu visit, mainly to check up on his old business partner. He found the shop closed and shuttered, but with him still in possession of the business's keys, he used them to open the place up. Before looking around inside upon entering the shop, Sergio immediately noticed signs of a violent struggle. Toolboxes had been thrown over their contents, having spilled across the floor while sheets of paperwork lay scattered across the shop. Sergio called out for Hario, and then headed towards the office they used to share. And there he found his old friend lying lifeless on the carpet, covered in a large plastic tarp. Sergio rushed to contact 911. And upon the arrival of emergency services, police officers discovered that Hayo had been the victim of a brutally vicious murder. There were multiple STA wounds to his throat and chest, and he appeared to have been deceased for the better part of 4 days. Blood trails leading to another area of the auto shop suggested that Hario had been dragged across the floor following his slang, while a broken window indicated the killer's clear point of entry. Officers then noticed that Hao's wallet was missing, as were the keys to his white Hyundai Tiburon, which was also nowhere to be found. Investigators also established that another vehicle, green Subaru, had also been stolen from the lot. Despite Easy Drive, auto deer of security cameras, police were able to locate one attached to a neighboring business, which had a view of the auto shop. This is how detectives discovered that on the very same day Hario was murdered, a rotund African-American gentleman arrived at the shop after a brief conversation. Ario and the large visitor are seen climbing into the green Subaru, after which they depart on what appears to be a routine test drive. Exactly 6 minutes later, the two men returned to the auto shop in the same car, before Hayo appears to enter the business's office, and the African-American man departs on foot. However, just over an hour later, the portly gentleman reappears on camera, only this time, instead of approaching the business overtly, the man appears to sneak around the side of the auto shop out of Hayo's sight, and the footage is grainy, meaning it was impossible to properly identify the man. But the very next day, the man returns and appears to drive off in Hiro's white Hyundai, while his dead body lies in the office. Then on the same day, Sergio discovered his old friend's body. The large black gentleman can be seen returning to the business before driving off from the green Subaru. In the aftermath of Fagio killing, local police appealed to the public for information leading to his killer's capture. Just days later, a woman named Kristen told investigators that just 2 days prior to FR's murder, she had witnessed a heavy-set African-American male exiting the auto shop's office through the window. Before calmly walking away, she had found the incident slightly suspicious but didn't think to contact police until she learned of Hero's murder. Following an analysis of Hero's bank statements, investigators learned that on the morning he was murdered, he visited a nearby gas station in the company of that heavy-set African-American, and once his transaction concludes, Harry O. seems to invite the man to climb into the passenger seat of his white Hyundai before the pair drive off together. A security camera footage from the gas station was crystal clear, allowing officers to positively identify the larger black gentleman. It was none other than David Morris, and it was later established that David had used Hero's credit card to make several large purchases, including an industrial-strength vacuum cleaner. David also used the credit card to purchase fast food liquor and several bags worth of groceries. Police also discovered that just 2 days after the vacuum was purchased, it was sold to a pawn shop in Portage, Indiana. The shop security cameras showed David Morris arriving with a friend in the missing green Subaru, before using the friend's ID to sell the vacuum supposedly in an attempt to avoid void detection. Just days later, David arrived at an Indiana courthouse for a probation hearing pertaining to a previous crime. As he walked down the courthouse steps following the conclusion of the hearing, he was promptly arrested by members of law enforcement. David admitted to stealing the cars but denied any involvement in Hero's murder, arguing that the purpose of the visit on the 19th of April had been to give the mechanic a pack of cigarettes. However, during the interview, police noticed that David appeared to be wearing the exact same clothes visible in the surveillance footage from the day of Howe's murder. Officers ordered them confiscated and then sent them away to a lab for analysis. Just a few days later, the results were returned, having made no attempt to properly clean them. David's clothes were found to be covered in Howe's DNA, specifically as a result of coming into contact with his blood. The murder weapon, a serrated kitchen knife, was found hidden under the hood of the green Subaru at the climax of his trial. In December of 2016, David Morris was found guilty of first-degree murder and then sentenced to a total of 82 years in prison. The murder of his wife, however, remains unsolved, as does the mysterious death of his girlfriend Anna Reeves. In 2016, September the 18th was a Sunday, and I'll remember that till the day I die. I was living with my boyfriend, now husband, in a place called Boreham near Chelmsford. We had a nice little rented house in a cul-de-sac called Sussex Clothes number 30 right on the end of the clothes, and the living room had a window that looked right out onto the street outside. I remember getting a text from my husband in the late afternoon just saying Watford beat United out for the night. I remember that. And honestly, I was quite excited to have the night to myself, to be honest. I opened a bottle of wine, got all cozy in my jammies on the couch, and then settled in to watch Jurassic World for a bit of nostalgia, since I loved the originals back when I was a little girl. I must have been no more than about half an hour into the film when I literally hear tires screeching outside. Then as I looked out the window, I saw a car speeding up to the end of the street. I heard tires screeching again as it came to a stop. So right away I'm thinking, what the bloody hell is going on here? And then I watched as the driver got out and ran towards our front door. I could see it was a woman from her long hair and her figure. I just didn't recognize the blur that ran down our path. Seconds later, I hear a dum 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 on my front door, and I wasn't about to just open it to a complete stranger, so I took another look outside to see if I recognized the car they'd been driving. It turns out I did recognize it on second inspection, and that's when I realized that the person at the door was my friend Kate. I rushed to open it, then literally gasped when I first saw her because her face was just a complete mess. She had blood all over her mouth and shin from where it had been streaming out of her nose and lips. Her cheek was all swollen, and she had this massive egg on her forehead where it looked like someone had punched her. No sooner had I opened the door that she barged in looking absolutely terrified and just said to me, "He's coming. Call the police now." We've been close friends since our early 20s, meaning Kate had been over to our house loads of times before, so as some shouting, "Who's coming? What the bloody hell's going on?" She busies herself with slamming the door behind her before grabbing the keys off the sideboard to lock it. I scurried into the living room to grab my phone, and I did as she asked and called the police. but the whole time I'm still shouting, "Who's coming?" Kate talked to me she'd run off into the kitchen after slamming the door, and when she reappeared after I shouted for her, she had the biggest knife we had in her hand. I didn't really have time to react to that, realizing just how freaking serious the situation was because I had to start talking to the dispatcher to tell her what was going on. At that point, Katie literally had to tell me what was going on so I could pass it on to the 999 lady, but instead, she tells me to pass her the phone and she starts telling her herself also. She didn't say all of what I'm about to type out, but it's like the whole backstory. So, at least you'll be up to date with context. Basically, Katie been seeing some guy for the past few months, a weightlifter that she'd met down at the gym. She'd mentioned him to me once or twice, and she'd be the first to admit this. Kate had a lot of different men in her life at that time, and that's fine because she was still young. Free single and shopping around, she made sure to tell every guy that she was seeing around then that they wouldn't be exclusive, and at face value, every one of them was fine with it. She didn't prolong the agony if she didn't think things would work out either. She wasn't in it for free dinners or anything like that. She was in it to meet her eventual husband, which is exactly what she did in the end. Once she realized a guy wasn't the one, she'd sort of sit them down somewhere nice in public and give them the old "it's not you, it's me" routine. She said she always was very sensitive and considerate about it, and I believe her because that's just the kind of person she was outside of her dating life anyway. According to her, no one had ever had a problem with it before they knew what they were getting into, and for the most part, most BLS took it on the chin as best they could. But then this one fella, the weightlifter she'd met at the gym, a guy called Paul, had taken her rejection of him. Not so lightly. She never told him where she lived, so she was horrified to find him outside of her flat one day. He wasn't aggressive about it, but he basically demanded a second chance with her. And Katie was so creeped out that Paul had managed to track her down that she told him that she'd get the police involved if he showed up outside her flat. Again, apparently he told her come off it. There's no need for any of that, and then turned up again a few days later, again demanding a second chance. He wasn't so nice about it the second time though, and she was late for work because Paul basically wouldn't let her leave until she said that she texted him about going out for drinks over the weekend. She drove to work, had a bit of a breakdown in the staff room, so her manager told her to clock out, go home, and take all the time she needed to deal with the situation. Before she came back to work, she drives back to Chelmsford, calls the police, and is giving them a statement by early afternoon. The two police women who came to see her told her that they judged stalking cases using the FIR system, or the 4 system. Any behavior that was fixated, obsessive, unwanted, and repeated could be classified as harassment or stalking. And since Paul had turned up twice without any invitation, having obviously stalked her for a while to work out where she lived, that most definitely qualified as criminal harassment. The policewoman told Kate that she and a colleague would be in touch with Paul just to let him know that if he approached her again, he'd be arrested and charged. Apparently, he told him it was all just a misunderstanding, and that of course he'd leave her alone if she wasn't interested. But that was an incredibly big lie. That same day, Paul waited until he knew Kate would be home from work, and then went around, forced his way into her flat, after tricking her into buzzing him in, and then beat the living crap out of her before she managed to escape. She told me he only stopped hitting her after she started to play dead, at which point she legged it out of the flat, jumped in her car, and drove straight over to our house. She said the only reason she hadn't called the police on the drive over was she was terrified of crashing. She had blood pouring out of her mouth and nose, and she was shaking with adrenaline. It took all of her composure to get there in one piece, but she did. And after pulling into our street, slamming her foot down on the brakes and running up to our driveway to our door, that's where I entered the picture when she took the phone from me. Kate told the dispatcher a very condensed version of what I just told you, holding my phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other as she was talking. She barged past me into the living room so she could also look out the big window that had a view of the street outside. But no sooner than she also saw headlights suddenly light up the end of the street and a second car skidded to a stop at the end of our street in the moment. I wasn't 100% certain of who it was driving, but Kate was. She absolutely tore past me again, thrusting the phone into my hands as she did then. As she was running up the stairs and out of sight, I looked out of the living room window to see this massive, bald, bodybuilder-looking bloke stomping down our path towards the front door. The next thing I hear, our door getting hammered on for the second time. That evening, only that time, it was even louder and even scarier. I was terrified, more terrified than I'd ever been in my entire life, and I did the only thing I could think to do, which was to basically play D. I still had the 999 lady on the phone when I started shouting stuff like, "What the bloody hell you doing banging on the door this time of night?" And we had those 2 frosted glass panels on the front door, and our burglar light was on outside so we could sort of see each other and hear each other through the door. So after I shouted at him, all I heard back was, "If you don't open this door, I'm going to bash it in." I never heard anyone sound so angry in all my life. He sounded like an animal, like he was growling and frothing at the mouth. We'd already told the police where we were by then, and Chelmsford Police Station is literally only a few miles down the road. So I started shouting back that the police are on their way. "I've already called them now, bugger off before you get arrested." I remember having a bit of a panic after I said that, and I remember putting the phone to my ear and started saying to the lady, "Did you hear that he's trying to kick my door down? Please make sure someone's on the way, I'm begging you." And I had this horrible idea in my head that the police wouldn't be able to get to us in time. You hear all sorts of horrible stories about budget cuts and long response times, but the lady on the other end kept telling me someone's on the way. "My love, don't you worry. They'll be there in just a couple of minutes, all right?" And I started shouting all that to Paul outside, and I suppose on some level it actually got through to him a little bit. He stopped kicking on our door, then in the voice that sounded a little bit more composed, he just said, "I know she's in there." I went back to playing ignorant and told him I had no idea what he was on about and that I was home alone and no one was with me in response. Paul went absolutely mental. He started slamming his foot into the door, really trying to kick it down, and he started screaming, "I can see your blood on the door, you stupid cow." And I felt my heart sink all the way down to my stomach. Kate must have had some on her hands when she banged on the door. My attempt at playing ignorant hadn't worked for a second, and Paul knew that she was in our house from the moment he saw the blood smear on our bright white front door, and I suddenly realized that there was nothing I could say or do to keep him from breaking his way in. And so I did the same thing I'd seen Kate do just minutes before and ran to my kitchen to grab something to defend myself with. In this case, another night knife. I started telling him how if he got inside I was going to cut him up, but it was like he couldn't even hear me anymore. Paul started to take these big run-ups and doing flying kicks to the door, and then after 1 or 2, which must have weakened the frame enough, the door kind of popped out of the lock or something, and it came ajar enough for him to shoulder barge it all the way open. I held the knife up as he came through the door, and I honestly thought that'd keep away from me. But to my absolute horror, Paul didn't seem even remotely put off. He took a few steps towards me as I was screaming, "Get out. Leave me alone." And then he suddenly lunged towards me and shoved me backwards to the ground, and he was so strong I didn't stand a chance. But as I was falling backwards, I managed to catch him with that big bread knife I was holding, and so all that force to use to shove me came back to almost literally bite him, because the blade of that knife caught his skin as I fell and opened up, a huge cut on his wrist and forearm. He screamed as I hit the carpet in our hallway, and I remember scrambling backwards as he put a hand over the wound. Then as blood started to well up from between his fingers, I remember he looked at me and started screaming, "I'm going to effing kill you." His eyes were just completely gone by that point. And by that, I mean, he was just absolutely berserk. I honestly think if the police hadn't have turned up when they did, they really would have killed me. But as I was kicking and screaming, trying to keep him off of me, I just remember seeing these flashing lights outside in the street behind him from our front door. It was a straight walk down the hall into the kitchen so you could see outside from where I was lying. The second I saw those lights, I started screaming, "Help, help me. He's going to kill me," at the top of my lungs, and it only took a second for Paul to work out that we weren't alone anymore. I remember how he turned around, blood still pouring out of his arm, and when he saw the police, he just charged towards them. It took 5 of them, with tasers, pepper spray, and batons, to get Paul in the ground and in handcuffs, and it caused so much of a ruckus that almost everyone in our whole street came out to watch as they bundled him to the back of the police van. Kate wouldn't come out of hiding until she saw the police. She'd been hiding in our cupboard upstairs, still gripping that kitchen knife she'd grabbed when she first arrived. She ended up staying with us for a while after that, and the whole Paul story didn't end. Then it took months of court dates and police visits before Kate was finally able to get a restraining order. But even then, she didn't feel 100% safe living in that area of Essex. All the legal stuff was just mega depressing too. All the judges had to be 100% sure Paul had definitely been stalking her before they finally put pen to paper. And for a while it didn't look like she was going to get a restraining order at all. It all worked out for the best in the end. Just not in Borum. We both live somewhere else now at a distance. It's not so easy to see each other every week like we used to, but we're still really close. Me and Kate will always be really close. Not just because I rescued her. Like she says, because I think she rescued herself. To be honest, I just helped a bit because I love her so much, and I'd willingly go through all that crap again if it meant keeping one of my friends safe from a monster like. During the opening months of 2018, William Andrew Jones Jr., or Willie as he was known to those close to him, was a promising former high school football player in his home of Scott County, Mississippi. Willie's mother, Tammy Town, and once referred to her son as a cheerful and optimistic young man who possessed a wicked sense of humor, and his 21-year-old Willie could often be found hanging out with friends or tending to the horses his family kept on their property. He loved those horses, but that love paled in comparison to that which he felt for his girlfriend Alexis Rankin, and their 4-month-old baby Willie wanted nothing more than to provide for his new family, and as of February of 2018, he planned to qualify as an oil pipeline operator, where even an entry-level position would land him anywhere between $40,000 to $60,000 a year. Yet, to his mother's infinite horror and heartbreak, William would never live to realize his ambitions. On the evening of February 8th, Alexis Rankin was driving back to her place with Willie in the front passenger seat, and a mutual friend named Shania Pace behind them. Shania later told police that Willie and Alexis had been engaged in a heated disagreement during the drive, and that the argument stemmed from the fact that Shania had been texting a male acquaintance that Willie had not been aware of Alexis Rank, and confirmed this but added that at the confrontation climax, Willie had struck her violently across the face by the time Alexis pulled into the driveway of her home. She was as terrified as she was distraught, and after parking her car and turning off the engine, she ran towards the front door with Willie in hot pursuit. Alexis's mother later testified that as she ran up to her bedroom in tears, Willie had attempted to follow her but was halted by herself and Alexis's stepfather, Harold O'Brien. Harold ordered Willie to leave his home with Alexis herself, watching him walk out of the door. Yet after confining herself to her bedroom for a minute or two, she suddenly changed her mind and expressed a desire to go after him. Alexis walked out of her bedroom and downstairs towards the front door of her home, when suddenly her mother began blocking her path. "She wouldn't let me leave," Alexis later said. "She made me stay inside till the police got there, and I had no idea what happened until my stepdaddy came back." Harold O'Brien. Alexis's stepfather recounted a similar version of events. He told police that Willie and his stepdaughter had been loudly arguing in one of the home's back bedrooms, and after checking up on the situation with Alexis's mother, they found that Willie had confiscated her phone and refused to return it. Harold claimed that they'd ordered their daughter's boyfriend to give back her phone, at which point he obliged them, and after that he walked through our home mumbling something to himself and then out the front door. Harold explained, "I figured he'd be back in a few minutes. They argued before and he'd always come back after a few minutes outside." Harold claimed he waited 5 minutes and then 10. But after an hour had elapsed and there was still no sign of Will, he walked out into the porch to see if he could spot him. He did. Willie was lying at the base of a nearby tree, having been strangled to death with a leather belt upon spotting Wiley's lifeless corpse. Harold claimed he rushed back inside to call 911. He asked the dispatcher if he should remove the belt from Willie's neck and began performing CPR. The dispatcher responded by telling him to leave Wiley's body alone, to which Harold replies with audible relief, "I don't want to touch him. I don't want to be involved." Within 40 minutes of Harold's call to emergency services, emergency medical technicians had pronounced Willie dead at the scene, but when his mother, Tammy Townsend, asked how he died, she was given an answer that shocked her to her core. Willie had been deliberately asphyxiated. Tammy was bereft, but she was also deeply confused. Willie had no history of psychological problems, and at least in his mother's opinion, no one loathed him enough to want to murder him. However, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation and the FBI both disagreed, claiming Wiley's death had been the result of a tragic but ultimately personal misadventure, and that no further investigation was necessary. Tammy Townsend protested, claiming that there was no way her son could have died in such a manner. Yet after a grand jury convened to analyze the evidence, they too rolled out any kind of homicide investigation. Yet it appeared in their initial analysis of the facts law enforcement glossed over some deeply troubling details on February 4th of 2018, just 4 days before Willie's death. Harold O'Brien is believed to have openly threatened him following an argument with Alexis at her place of work. According to her co-workers, Alexis's stepfather had told her, "If this happens again, you know what I'm going to do to him." And this was not the first time he'd acted in an aggressive manner to one of his stepdaughter's boyfriends. In a previous incident, Harold had threatened a boy with a broken beer bottle and was arrested after chasing him for half a mile down a city street. Shania Pace, the mutual friend in Alexis's car on the night Willie died, also testified that Harold was a violent man. She told police on the night in question, Harold had argued viciously with Willie prior to his departure, then had to be physically restrained by Alexis's mother, Melissa. He said something about getting his gun. Chenille later told police Alexis's mom stopped him, but he followed Willie outside without it. Neighbors told law enforcement they heard 3 men arguing outside before a loud machine-like noise drowned out the voices. What created this noise has never been established, but to one neighbor it sounded an awful lot like a truck's engine revving violently for a moment or two, before suddenly ceasing. Jill Jefferson, who investigated the case on behalf of Willie's mother, has pointed to several pieces of evidence that in her mind have some deeply chilling implications. Firstly, Willie was known to have suffered a rather serious sports injury during the latter stages of his high school football career. This injury was so severe that it precluded any chance of him continuing at a college level, as it made it almost impossible for Willie to raise his right arm above the shoulder. According to Jill Jefferson, this made it almost impossible that Willie had tied the belt around his own neck, which completely contradicted the narrative of the local sheriff's department. But Jill wasn't the only one who disagreed with law enforcement rather than characterize Will's injuries as self-sustained. The Scott County coroner claimed the manner of his death was, quote, undetermined. They noted the pronounced bruising patterns associated with ligature strangulation and refused to rule out the possibility that Willie had been murdered. And that's not all their report read in one section. The coroner wrote that blades of grass had been recovered from Will's wallet, suggesting that he'd been dragged along a patch of grass with a great deal of force in the hours prior to his death. The fact that his right shoulder was dislocated, a relic of his old sports injury, also pointed towards the theory that he'd been violently dragged across the ground prior to his passing. Jill Jefferson also attempted to draw attention to a piece of security camera footage which dramatically challenges the official narrative surrounding Wiley's death. Taken from the security camera of a neighboring house, the footage shows Alexis, Willie, and Shania arriving at her home at exactly 10:35 p.m. Alexis jumps out of the driver's seat deeply upset and then runs towards the front door and into the house. Shania follows, but Willie does not. Instead, he stays in the car until exactly 10:44 p.m., and only then does he exit the vehicle and approach Alexis's home. Not long after, Harold asks Willie to leave, and he does so, and then just minutes later, at exactly 10:50 p.m., Harold Bryant makes that all-important 911 call and proceeds to relay a startlingly inaccurate piece of information. If you remember, he claimed Willie had been gone for around 30 minutes, but the security camera footage showed that no more than 6 minutes had elapsed between Willie getting out of Alexis's car and the 911 call being made. Harold claimed it had been 30 minutes before he stepped onto his porch to see Wiley's lifeless body, in which case why did he make the 911 call after only 6? Jill Jefferson had also pointed to the fact that on the night of Willie's death, his mother received a deeply troubling phone call at exactly 10:45 p.m. Tammy Townsend received a call from Melissa Rankin, Alexis's mother, who screamed at Tammy that she needed to come and pick up her son and then promptly hung up. Tammy then got into her car and on the drive over to the scene of the crime called Alexis at exactly 10:48 p.m. in an attempt to better discern what exactly was going on. Tammy claimed that Alexis answered the call but didn't say anything and quickly terminated the connection action. Yet she also claimed that during the few short seconds the call connected, she heard a faint voice calling out, "He's dead." This is at least 60 seconds before Harold O'Brien placed his 911 call. All things considered, Jill Jefferson puts forward a compelling argument. Not only are there many inconsistencies in the official narrative, but several pertinent details seem to have been completely ignored by both state and federal law enforcement. The dislocated shoulder, the grass in Wiley's wallet, and the dramatic differences in Harold's timeline all point to a deeply sinister explanation what was painted as a tragic accident. Even upon the most cursory of glances, looks an awful lot like cold-blooded. Judgment on the evening of November 3rd, 2019, 18-year-old Caitlin Lancashire received a text message from her cell phone on the evening of November 3rd, 2019. 18-year-old Caitlin Lancashire received a text message on her cell phone. Caitlin lived on the outskirts of Knutsford, a small town in the mostly rural English county of Cheshire. Although she was a pleasant and popular young woman, Caitlin was no stranger to the kinds of interpersonal dramas that are common among teenagers. Yet the contents of the text message she received that night was enough to make her head spin. "Hi, Caitlin." The message read, "I thought I should let you know that over the past 2 or 3 weeks your boyfriend has been trying to message me. He also came to my house in his car to meet me last week, but I told him my dad wouldn't allow me to leave. I've told him that our message exchange has to stop, but I thought I'd let you know before he actually cheats on you. I didn't even know he was dating you until I went to follow him on Instagram." It was the message that every girl dreads, but when Caitlin confronted her boyfriend, 18-year-old Matthew Mason appeared to have no idea what she was talking about. Matthew was the son of a millionaire farmer and had recently enrolled in a nearby university to study agricultural engineering and was a proud member of the National Federation of Young Farmers. According to most, he was a polite, affable young man who had been Caitlin's long-term boyfriend for the previous 2 years. On no previous occasion had Matthew given her any reason whatsoever to doubt his fidelity, so his categorical denials seemed more than convincing. But in truth, and despite his apparent disinterest in other girls, Matthew was lying to her around the same time Caitlin received that fateful text message its author sent another to Matthew. This one said something to the effect of, "I've told your girlfriend about us because what you've been doing is wrong. She loves you. There's no need for you to be speaking with me. You need to tell her the truth, Matt, because I already have it." Seems Matthew then attempted to deny all knowledge of the allegations and claimed he had no idea who was texting him. The person replied, "Don't lie, I've got proof that we talked." Matthew appeared unbothered by this claim, but the next was substantially more difficult to deny. Matthew's mysterious affair partner informed him that not only had they taken screenshots of their many lengthy conversations, but they'd also made copies of several nude photographs Matthew had sent them. "If you don't stop lying," the person said, "I will literally put those pictures on my Instagram story and tag you in them." Matthew begged the person not to post his intimate pictures and offer £50 in exchange for their silence. He appears to have paid this money without an ounce of hesitation, because he wasn't just cheating on Caitlin with another girl from their age group. The individual he'd been dating for the past few months was a 15-year-old boy named Alex Rhoda. Alex's mother, Lisa Rhoda, later said that even from the earliest of ages, she could tell Alex was different from other boys. "He was very feminine," she said. "He used to put on my shoes and jewelry and then go string around the house in it. I remember when he was 13, she continued. Alex came into the kitchen and said he needed to talk, but I knew what he was about to tell me, and I knew straight away because everyone knew we'd always known Alex was gay, and we loved him all the same. It was later discovered that during the latter half of 2019, Alex had been the one to initiate contact with Matthew, and did so via social media. Despite their initial conversation being confined to Facebook, the pair soon switched to Snapchat, an app Matthew believed would allow him to maintain anonymity while taking their conversation in a decidedly inappropriate direction. Just a few weeks later, Matthew and Alex met for the first of several inappropriate encounters, and it appears the 15-year-old schoolboy believed their relationship had a future. He began to tell close friends that he was secretly dating a man 3 years his senior, who, unlike himself, was not openly homosexual. These friends urged Alex to be cautious, as pursuing such a relationship could potentially end in heartbreak, but Alex paid no heed and continued to pursue a relationship with the older Matthew. It's possible that in order to ensure the relationship was covert, Matthew made a deliberate attempt to digitally distance himself from the younger Alex. Matthew's Facebook page apparently made no mention of his heterosexual relationship with Caitlin, and neither did a Snapchat profile, but upon gaining access to his Instagram page, Alex discovered that Matthew was being unfaithful. He was understandably angry and did the same thing many of us would do if caught in the same situation. But during the course of the confrontation that followed, Matthew made a serious error of judgment in return for a silence regarding earning. The exchange of nude photographs Matthew offered Alex, 50 English, P. Alex accepted. But the payments did not stop there. Over the next 30 days, Matthew Mason deposited just over £2,000, and Alex Roa's bank account in amounts ranging from 50 and 400. Some claimed that Matthew made these deposits without any direction whatsoever from Alex. But text exchanges revealed that on more than one occasion, Alex demanded money from Matthew in exchange for his continued silence each time Matthew obliged him. And it appears Alex wasn't shy about sharing his newfound wealth with his circle of friends. One later said that she didn't think much of the first few deposits, but upon learning that the amount had risen to more than 2,000, she realized that Alex was, quote, playing with fire. I warned him to get out, she later said, but he didn't listen. Finally, on December 12th of 2019, Matthew told Alex that his bank account was empty and needed time to secure additional funds. However, he also mentioned that following a Christmas visit from a distant but wealthy relative, he'd received a large amount of cash as a holiday gift. Matthew then proposed that he and Alex go somewhere secluded so they could enjoy a little privacy after he gave him the cash. Alex accepted the offer then at exactly 5:24 p.m. A nearby security camera spotted him departing his home before climbing into the passenger seat of Matthew Mason's Renault Clio. Alex had been wise enough to inform friends of his whereabouts, having texts one just an hour previous to say, "This guy I'm meeting wants to take me to a special secret place in a forest." This friend implored Alex to reconsider the invitation and advised him to meet Matthew in a well-lit public place. Yet once again, Alex disregarded his friend's advice, telling her he needed the money. Minutes after getting into Matthew's car, Alex posted a picture on Snapchat of himself inside the vehicle, with a small love heart emoji at the bottom. It was the last snap Alex would ever send. Matthew and Alex drove out to a remote area of woodland near a small village named Ashley. Then, after parking his car out of sight from the main road, the two young men walked off into the forest together. It's possible that Alex had been enticed by the prospect of intimate relations, as there was no need to travel to a private location in order to receive a cash payment. But the fact remains that when Matthew told Alex to walk off into the woods ahead of him, he did so unquestioningly, giving Matthew the perfect opportunity to strike after just a minute or two of following Alex through the trees. Matthew produced a wrench that he managed to conceal on his person. With his victim still completely oblivious to the potential danger, Matthew lunged forward and struck Alex in the back of the head with as much force as he could possibly muster. The initial blow sent Alex tumbling into the dirt beneath him, dazed, disoriented, and in complete agony from what was no doubt an acute skull fracture. Then, once Alex was completely defenseless, Matthew brought the wrench down onto his skull over and over again until his victim was almost completely unrecognizable. Matthew later said that Alex had still been breathing once the attack had ceased, but from the weak gargling sounds the boy was making, he knew it wouldn't be long before he expired. Matthew then drove to the farm of some family friends, knowing the facilities would be unmanned on a Wednesday evening, and there he used the faucet to wash the blood from his hands, and then, after ensuring he'd rid himself of all visible signs of the murder, he drove to not one but two nearby public houses to socialize with friends and establish an alibi. Once he'd established his presence elsewhere at the time of Alex's murder, Matthew then drove all the way back to the scene of the crime, where he attempted to move his victim's body. Matthew dragged Alex's corpse to the side of the road and then attempted to haul his body into the trunk of his car. But Alex was not small of stature, and despite his efforts, Matthew was unable to complete his intended task. Instead of absconding with Alex's corpse, Matthew simply abandoned it by the side of the road, confident that he'd remained concealed from the prying eyes of the general public. Only that wasn't strictly true. Unbeknownst to Matthew, a passerby had been watching from the cover of a nearby hedgerow and realized that someone was trying to haul a dead body into their trunk. This passerby then pulled out their phone, zoomed in on their camera as much as possible, and snapped half a dozen pictures of Matthew, his car, and its unique registration number before reporting him to local police a few hours later, at exactly 10:20 p.m. Matthew sent a picture of himself to Caitlin Lancashire, by then his ex-girlfriend, depicting him in bed, shirtless and smiling. Caitlin ignored the picture, but the following morning woke up to another message from Matthew, this one depicting his feet on the floor of his car. Caitlin actually replied to the second picture message and asked Matthew if he was okay. He replied that he was, and I quote, fine, but as the day unfolded, it became obvious that he was anything but. On the afternoon of December 13, 2019, Caitlin Lanier received a text message from a close friend asking if she knew where Matthew Mason was, presumably, with it being a Thursday. Matthew was either attending university lectures or was at home with his parents, but upon suggesting that Caitlin heard that he was at neither location, and what's more, Caitlin was told that Matthew was wanted for questioning in connection with the disappearance of a 15-year-old boy. If she could get him on the phone and coax him to reveal his location, she would be doing this boy's terrified parents a huge favor. And suddenly Matthew's cryptic picture messages started to make sense. They weren't an unexpected attempt at reconciliation. They were either a subtle attempt to establish an alibi or a cryptic cry for help. Caitlin called Matthew immediately and demanded to know where the missing Alex was. Her ex-boyfriend replied that Alex had been begging him for a ride to a pub in nearby Holmes Chapel. But after obliging him, the pair had parted ways on any other occasion. The LIE might well have been a convincing one, but in this instance, Caitlin later said that she could hear something in Matthew's voice, something which led her to believe that, and I quote, Matthew already knew the police were after him. Caitlin then asked if it was true, in that he'd been paying Alex for a silence, and in the process of giving a full and frank admission, Matthew broke down in tears and then simply said, "I've killed him." Hours later, Alex's partially clothed corpse was discovered by refuse collectors in the same spot Matthew had abandoned it the night before, and just a short time afterwards, Matthew's car was stopped by police with the man himself behind the wheel. Officers observed that he had dried blood on his hands, and then his vehicle contained a bin bag housing his blood-stained green fleece, the murder weapon, and Alex's large padded jacket, which by then was stained with his blood at his trial. It emerged that Matthew had searched Google for answers to the following questions. What would happen if you kick someone down the stairs? Which everyday poisons are the most effective? And are there any unsolved missing person cases from Cheshire, England? In his defense, Matthew claimed that he'd only attacked Alex as a means of defending himself, and that the stocky 15-year-old had in fact lured him into the woods with a promise of conciliation. However, this claim was swiftly refuted by the prosecution, who fielded several expert witnesses, each of whom testified that the first blow had been inflicted to the rear of Alex's skull. By the time their testimony had concluded, the jury was left in no doubt that what had occurred had been a brutal and deadly ambush after being found guilty of Alex Roa's murder. Matthew Mason was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 28 years in prison, before he'll finally be eligible for parole. Judge Stephen Everett told Matthew that he was much more worldly wise than his victim, who was young and immature for his age, then added that, although I accept Alex Roda may very well have initiated contact with you in the latter half of 2019, I am sure that you not only responded but actively encouraged an inappropriate relationship. You groomed him. It was not your first intimate experience, but it was his. While it is clear that Alex Roda naively, as I see it, demanded money from you, the judge continued, it must be firmly kept in mind that this all came about because of your offense, and it was your choice alone to behave in that way. And a victim impact statement. Alex's mother told the courtroom, when you lose a child in the most horrific and brutal circumstances as a parent, you really do experience hell. My boy was raised in love, not fear. He did not wear a mask. I brought my son up to be proud of who he was. He was 15. He was full of joy, inspiration, enthusiasm for life. He lived in love. He was raised in love. He brought joy and light wherever he went.